So thank you all for coming. It's really great to see as many of you here as we have for this student research brown bag. Nicole Mandall is going to be our presenter. She entered the NPH program in 2018. She graduated with her NPH in this last summer, 2020. And she's currently a program specialist with the New Mexico Primary Care Training Consortium, which she might tell us a little about. She's going to be presenting today on her thesis research, which is on intimate partner violence in Doña Ana County. She's also written up her results for publication, and those results are currently under review at the Maternal and Child Health Journal. Before I give the floor to Nicole, I also wanted to introduce Juan Carlos Padilla. He's our moderator today. He's going to be monitoring the chat line for your questions, which we will hold until the end of the presentation. If you would prefer, you could also wait till the end and raise the blue hand to ask your question yourself. We are recording the seminar, so it will be available on the Sweeter website very shortly after the seminar is over. And in the meantime, if you would keep your microphones on mute so we minimize background noise, that would be great. And I think it's nothing left to say, Nicole, but take it over.
All right, thanks for having me, Dr. McDonald.
Wait, 1 second. Let me just say one thing. Nicole is very busy in her new job. She's actually traveling at this moment in a car with her computer and a driver. Okay, go ahead.
So if at any time you can't hear me, Dr. McDonald, Juan Carlos, just speak up, okay?
All right.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. My presentation is titled Intimate Partner Violence in Doña Ana County, New Mexico from 2015 to 2017. And this was, like Dr. McDonald was saying, my thesis project for my MPH. And yeah, I'll just take it away.
Okay.
So an outline for what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a little bit of background information, contribution of the thesis, objectives, methods, results, discussion, limitations, and then some implications and conclusions. So background, what do we know already about IPV? It affects nearly 4 women throughout their lifetime, and 5.8 annually on the treatment of medical and mental health needs and the loss of productivity that results from IPV. Some negative health consequences are cardiac problems, pulmonary problems, neurological problems, gastrointestinal, and we know that these are experienced more, these health consequences, as a result by minorities, those who live in poverty, and Latina immigrants. Continuing on with some background information. Hispanic women in and outside of the border region face maternal and child health disparities. Among perinatal Hispanic women outside of the region, IPV is linked to maternal and child health disparities such as low birth weight babies, early term birth, lack of prenatal care, and unintended pregnancy. Rates of IPV in Hispanic women vary widely. We see rates anywhere from 4% to 90%, and this is due to some methodological inconsistencies. So studies use different scales, different definitions of abuse, different time frames they're looking at, from lifetime to past 12 months, and different populations. So IPV among border Hispanic women is 16.4%. And this was in the past 12 months. And risk factors associated with IPV in Hispanic women are low income, unemployment, low levels of education, impulsivity, alcohol, drug use, single status, and witnessing or experiencing IPV as a child. We have mixed results on if pregnancy is a risk factor. Some studies show that it is a risk factor, while others say it's not. So what are we missing? There are currently, before this study, no quantitative studies on IPV rates among perinatal border region women. So the objectives of this study was to identify prevalence rates of IPV for this high-risk border population, compare the rates to similar populations, and then look for associations between demographic factors and IPV to identify high-risk groups. So what are our methods to do this? The study population was 758 Doña Ana County Healthy Start clients from 2015 to 2017. A little background, DACHS was a home visiting program that provided routine maternal and child-infant health services to low-income pregnant and recently pregnant women from 1999 until 2017 when it shut down in Las Cruces. Our study population was 673 women who had complete information, and then we took the subset of 671 Hispanic women. Our outcome variable was IPV, and we used the relationship assessment tool, which was a 12-question tool to measure IPV. 10 questions were Likert scale questions from the women's experience with battering scale. And the questions are scored and then summed. If a sum was equal to 20 or over, then they were considered a battered woman. If they were equal to 19 or lesser, then it was a non-battered woman. There were 2 extra questions that were yes or no, and an answer to yes on either of these questions labeled the woman as battered. Other demographic variables that we had access to were age, primary language, pregnancy status, ethnicity, and race. For our analysis, we took frequencies and percentages of population characteristics in relation to IPV as determined by the woman's first screen. The prevalence of positive IPV results in any screen, chi-square tests of independence to determine any demographic differences related to IPV status, logistic regression to test the contribution of demographic factors to the likelihood of a woman experiencing IPV. Then we ran some tests for trend on the categorical variable of age, and we set an alpha value for statistics equal to 0.05. Our results. So this is a table of the demographic factors for all 758 DACHS women in the 2015 to 2017 area. So you can see we had most women from 20 to 25. The race mainly was white, mainly Hispanic women, a little more that used Spanish as primary language, and then about 68% prenatal versus 31% postpartum. We have the population characteristics here of the subset of Hispanic women in relation to IPV. For age, if you look at this first column, you see that the youngest age group was the least percent battered, and it increased steadily with age. However, this was not found to be statistically significant, even when we ran a test of linear trend. For primary language, Spanish as a primary language was less percent battered, 5.2 compared to other. And then pregnancy status, postpartum women experienced more battering, 9.3 compared to 4.3, and this was statistically significant. Here we have the odds ratio of being battered, and you see the same trend with age, with the younger age group being a little bit protected, and the older age group being more likely to experience IPV. Primary language, Spanish, again, being a little bit protected compared to that other language group. And then pregnancy status, prenatal, being less likely to be to experience IPV compared to their reference group of postpartum. So for discussion, here we have the rates of IPV for women in the US of all races, ethnicities, rates of IPV for New Mexico women of all races and ethnicities. And then we have Hispanic non-border women and then Hispanic border women. You see that US women and New Mexico women experience lower percentages of IPV in both the before pregnancy and during pregnancy compared to the Hispanic non-border women. And then in our study, you do see higher rates in that during pregnancy for New Mexico women and US women, but it's a little less. It's about half of the Hispanic non-border women rate. So Hispanic perinatal women experience higher rates of IPV than the US perinatal women and may play a role in the MCH health disparities seen in Hispanic border women. Talking about a little bit about each of our variables. We use Spanish as a primary language as a proxy measure for acculturation. And while it was not statistically significant, speaking Spanish as a primary language did suggest the protective influence against IPV for this study population, which is consistent with other literature that shows greater acculturation is associated with greater victimization. However, there were some things that should be considered with this study population. Traditional Hispanic cultural norms, such as Spanish as primary language, ideas regarding gender roles, and familisimo can play a role in IPV perpetration and reporting. For instance, Spanish as a primary language contributes to isolation among Hispanic women and creates impediments in seeking help for the IPV. And traditional gender roles, such as female subservience, influence perceptions of abuse. So for instance, some studies found that Hispanic women indicate their willingness to tolerate abuse and not seek help because it is their self-sacrificing duty to keep the marriage and family intact. Another cultural norm, familismo, which values family cohesion over the self, was found in a few studies to impact reporting, with Hispanic females reporting a support network where they could talk about their IPV victimization more with family and friends rather than officials. So they would not speak with social support agencies, healthcare agencies, community health workers. And it was found that Hispanic populations are only half as likely to report IPV compared to non-Hispanic populations. In our study population, moving on from acculturation to age now. So in our study population, 10% experienced IPV in the oldest age group, and the youngest age group was less than half that. This is not statistically significant, but we do see that it increased with age, which is divergent from the literature, where the younger age group is routinely associated with IPV victimization in Hispanic women. And in perinatal Hispanic women too, most of the studies do show higher rates in younger ages, but also there were other studies that showed no relationship between age and IPV. So perhaps for our study population of low-income women, the older women were more financially dependent on their partners, putting them at increased risk of IPV. And this lack of financial independence is a risk factor for IPV in the border region and is consistent with the literature. Some issues in reporting. Methodological inconsistency could contribute to differences from the literature. Scales used can range from prams, questionnaires tailored specifically to Hispanic women, or just single survey items in many of the different studies done, as well as different approaches to asking about IPV, from outright to behavioral tactics to impact. So asking a woman outright, have you been abused, or more roundabout ways of asking about abuse and psychological abuse and that kind of thing. Another thing is the populations. They're heterogeneous mixture of Hispanic populations in regards to country of origin. Another issue in reporting could be the immigration status, which plays a role in underreporting. Undocumented women would not report IPV to healthcare workers because they were afraid their husbands would be deported, and they also feared deportation themselves if they sought help. Immigration status was identified as a key barrier to talking about IPV with a provider in numerous studies. DACHS did not require information on documentation, and when talking to people who ran this survey and this service, they indicated that there was a high proportion of undocumented women in this study population. So that along with the other factors related to acculturation and reporting in Hispanic populations, may play a role in the low rates seen in this study for Hispanic women compared to Hispanic women outside of the border. Some limitations of this study would be generalizability to different populations. It was a self-administered survey, so the inherent bias that could result in. And pregnancy status was not considered when giving the survey. It was simply first, when a woman sought services, they were given the survey within the first few weeks of services. Some conclusion. This was the first study to examine rates of IPV among perinatal Hispanic border women. IPV rates were higher after pregnancy compared to during pregnancy in our study. They're also higher in this population compared to New Mexico and US rates among women of all races and ethnicities. Some recommendations. So, social service protocols should specify IPV surveys be given before, during, and after pregnancy to better ascertain when help and services are needed for battered women. It would be helpful to have a longitudinal study to assess the nature of IPV over the life course in Hispanic border women and how culture, acculturation, and pregnancy affect the risk of IPV in these women. IPV prevention efforts should target women before and after pregnancy and address the cultural factors that may influence IPV in Hispanic border populations. And future studies should explore abuse among older women in this population, since it's different from what we see in the literature. A final thought, we know that due to the shelter-in-place policies due to COVID, that rates of IPV are increasing and victims are being locked in with their abusers. So I think that IPV prevention is more important than ever now. I'd like to thank Sweeter, my committee members, and the Healthy Start program director and clients for helping make this work. And that is everything. I'm gonna stop sharing now. All right, how do we want to do this? Is Juan Carlos, are you gonna do questions, or should I just?
I could start with a question. I raised my hand.
Okay.
I don't know, I haven't looked at the chat line though. I was wondering if you could explain, Nicole, you said one of the limitations of your study was that pregnancy status was not considered in the implementation of the survey. how could that be a limitation since you have pregnant and postpartum women? How would that work to bias or limit your results?
So like for DACHS, they did not consider the person's pregnancy status when they gave out the survey. They just gave it during their first few weeks of seeking service, which means a woman could come in as a prenatal woman and we have her results, or the woman could come in as a postpartum woman and we have her results. And it would be good to have both to see if there was difference.
Okay, so you're saying there might be some misclassification or something like that? Woman comes in postpartum and she's actually talking about her experience during pregnancy?
It could be that, yeah, definitely. But it could also be going on when she is prenatal, and we only know about it as she's postpartum.
So you'd like to see, for any given woman, if there's a change in that pattern.
Yes, yeah.
Goes through pregnancy. Yeah, well, your study design wouldn't have allowed for that, right?
No, it would not, unfortunately.
Okay, well, thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions in the chat box. Oh, I see one now, so I'll read it out. Or are you able to see the questions as well, Nicole?
Yeah, I can.
Why don't you read it, because I'm not sure everybody can see the question.
Okay. I'll read it. So question from Lorena Packard says, what is being done for women, as you said, that are being put in shelter in place with their abusers because loss of job, stress, and other factors can worsen the relationship dynamics?
That is a great question, Lorena. The answer is I'm not sure. I know there are resources in Doña Ana County, CASA, for instance, but I'm not sure if efforts have been increased or contacting people has been increased or not.
Okay. So now we have two individuals who have their hands raised. I think we can start with Dr. Soroka. I will unmute you so you can give your question. All right.
Thanks. Can you speak a little bit more? You had mentioned about how the self-administered aspect of the survey may have influenced your results. Can you speak more to that and how it would be different if it weren't self-administered?
Yeah. So for self-administered surveys, there's also always the possibility of bias in answering. Maybe they, I don't know, downplay the abuse, maybe they don't. But there's also a risk when asked verbally. If it wasn't self-administered, I think a lot of thought would need to go into this population about if a woman asked, if a man asked, if somebody from the culture community asked versus somebody outside, somebody seen as a leadership role or authoritarian role or not. So I think it would really need to be honed in about who was asking these questions to make it more legitimate.
The reason I ask is I worked at RTI and did a little bit of work on NISVIS, which is the big intimate partner violence study that CDC runs. And that's a phone survey where they're actually calling people on the phone and asking them detailed questions about this. And they go through a lot of painstaking steps to try to get, upfront and honest responses, because you're basically talking to some stranger on the phone about these things. So I'd almost think that a self-administered would be even better than that scenario in terms of getting honest reports of these things.
Yeah, you could be right.
So in your literature, Nicole, or in your literature review, did you find any, like gold standard for like survey method, whether it's, like by phone or self-administered, or is there really not any gold standard for intimate partner violence surveys?
You know, in my looking, I did not find a lot of analysis between the types of survey instruments, whether if it was self-administered or asked. There was a bit of research done on the types of questions. So if you asked an outright question or an impact question, indirect, it was found that a mixture of both was the best way to assess IPV status.
Interesting. Okay, and I see Dr. McDonald has her hand raised, so if you would like to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I will. I think you at least partially just answered my question. I was wondering what your thought was about, in our population, the best format for questions being, outright or behavioral related or impact or some combination. So it sounds like, and are there instances of that going on? Maybe not in our state, but elsewhere, where a combination of questions or types of questions is being used?
Yeah, there is. I think the PRAM survey does a good job of doing a combination of types of questions, which
what are they using? What impact and
direct?
I think and outright. Oh, okay.
Outright, yeah.
Thank you.
So I know there's several students here with us, Nicole, and I imagine some of them are on their thesis, or they may be contemplating a thesis if they're in the MPH or if they're looking to get into the MPH program. So I wanted to ask, what advice would you give to the students that might be interested in getting a thesis in how you found your research topic and how you were able to get, support from this program in Doña County that allowed you to get the data that you needed for your study?
Okay. Yeah, my first and biggest piece of advice would be to take your schedule you have in your mind and add a lot more time. It takes a lot longer than you would think. Also, just working with somebody that you share a good rapport with is good. So I was working with Dr. McDonald, Dr. Charlotte Gard, and Dr. Wilson, and they were all really great about giving me feedback and working with me and helping my writing. And Dr. McDonald had already had access, and Dr. Gard, to the data. So I kind of came in and took that data and worked with them with that.
Thank you. All right, well, if we still have time for questions if anybody would like to ask some.
I'd like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Very nice job, Nicole. I don't recall hearing any about maternal mortality data. Did you include anything about homicide as a cause of maternal mortality?
No, I didn't look at mortality at all.
Right. Well, when you get the paper back from the journal, they may give you the opportunity to expand upon your background discussion. And you might find something helpful there because there's many state maternal mortality surveillance systems which identify maternal deaths during pregnancy and within a year after delivery. So it would help to address the question of whether violence is greater before delivery or after. And you'd be able to identify homicide. And I think probably most of those systems also identify the perpetrator of the homicide as an intimate partner versus someone else, a friend, a stranger, and so on. So those results would be comparable. It might or might not be comparable to your results, but would also possibly identify some, you might be able to look at the issue of race and ethnicity as a factor associated with maternal homicides.
That's excellent. I'll have to look into that. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions?
Looks like there may not be any additional questions, so.
Oh, I have a quick question. Has this been published?
It's under review right now.
Accepted, under review, but not accepted yet, or not revised and submitted?
Yes.
What's the journal that you submitted it to? I'm sorry.
The Maternal and Child Health Journal.
And I believe someone else had a question or was going to say something.
Chris.
Oh, hi. I was gonna ask a similar question about publication, but thank you, Nicole, for this presentation. It was really useful and informative. So thank you.
Problem. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, Chris.
I'll ask one more because there's a big concern. I was just checking my email. There's a big concern about the drop in research going on with COVID-19. So maybe could you explain, I assume this may have started before COVID-19 or during, how has that impacted not just the responses you're getting, but just how the research you're able to get it done and that kind of stuff?
I think, yes, I did start this before COVID. And I think it just slowed it down a lot, which maybe is one of my suggestions is to just give yourself a lot more time. Going back and forth via email for papers and research and writing it up takes a lot more time than sitting in person and going through it. Also being able to get meetings with people in person, not really feasible. So Zooms, which you might or might not get everything you need out of. So it's just a lot more wrangling, a lot more technology, a lot more time.
Well, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, everyone, for participating. It was a great presentation, and you are setting some questions in motion here, and I think it's a good example for students who are following in your footsteps, Nicole.
Thanks, Dr. McDonald. It was a pleasure to talk with everyone today. Please feel free to reach out. I think my contact information may have gone out, maybe not.
Is it on your last slide or no?
No, but I'll type my email into the chat.
All right, great. Okay, and we will be putting your presentation up shortly. Hopefully we'll get up today. I'm not sure, but we'll try for it today. Okay. Thank you all again. Have a good Thanksgiving break.
Thank you, you too.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in next semester. We have several more students lined up to present, and we're looking forward to those presentations as well.
Awesome.
So long, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.